If you watch the closing credits of the evergreen film Bend It Like Beckham, you'll see outtakes from the shoot with cast and crew singing along, and leading them in a bop and a song is the director, Gurinder Chadha. Music and dance are clearly close to her heart, which is why I'm thrilled to be talking to her today. I'm David Jays, and this is Why Dance Matters, a new podcast from the Royal Academy of Dance. Conversations exploring how dance has an impact far beyond ballet, connecting to people's passions, their identity, and how they make space in the world. Gurinder Chadha doesn't make musicals, but her films, which also include Bhaji on the Beach, Bride and Prejudice, and Blinded by the Light, would only need the slightest nudge to become full-blown, singing, dancing spectaculars. Their wedding scenes, yearning montages, and huge heart always hover on the brink of musical uplift. No wonder Bend It Like Beckham did actually become a hit West End show. We're speaking as the UK edges out of lockdown. Gurinder is part of the reopening programme at the British Film Institute's home on London's South Bank in a season called Dream Palaces, where leading directors introduce a movie they love. Gurinder's choice is the 1976 classic Car Wash, another film that is so very nearly a musical. For dancers, leaving lockdown means the welcome return of live audiences. But why is that important for a film director? And I bet Gurinder looks good on the dance floor. We'll have to ask her. Gurinder, thank you so much for joining us. I have spent a week rewatching your movies, watching some of them for the first time, and that has slightly left me in bits, to be honest, because they are such an emotional ride. But they also feel as if they only need the slightest nudge to become musicals. Is that fair, do you think?
Yes, I think that is fair. I mean, music is an essential part of my life. I don't think I do anything without having some kind of musical component there in the background of my everyday life. You know, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, there's always something going on. And therefore in my films, you know, I often think musically, even if it might not be a musical, you know, music is very much integrated into my scripts and films, to the point where when actors join, I always say, well, what does your character listen to? What is the music that your character plays, you know, and things like that. So I think music is an amazing way of deciphering and coding who we are in terms of individuals and identity by our choices, but also emotionally and empathetically, and just in a sort of, as human beings, you know, the variety of what we all listen to and what makes us tick, as it were, I find endlessly interesting.
And actually, one of the films of yours that I hadn't seen before is an early TV documentary that you made, I think, in the late 1980s, called I'm British But.
Yes, that was my very first film.
Oh, was it? Ah, right, because it's free to watch on the BFI player, and I would totally recommend it. But what seemed so interesting was that it sows the seeds for so much of the ideas that you went on to explore. British Asian identity and the way that music and dance are integral to that identity. That was always on your radar, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that was a film that I made with a small grant from the British Film Institute at a time when I didn't think I would be a film director. I had trained as a journalist, and I was working as a journalist and as a researcher. And I had the opportunity to take part in this BFI New Director Scheme. And they would give you a bit of money if you knew what you wanted to say, you know, if you didn't have to have film experience. And I really wanted to document what was going on in Britain at the time that was so important to me, which was a sort of British-born music industry of Bhangra music, and dance. We used to have these daytimers and these concerts,
Yes.
and it was an important, integral part of my identity being British and Indian. And the music reflected that, and then so did all the culture around it in terms of, as I said, the daytimers. We would get Hammersmith Palais, or there was the Empire Ballroom in Leicester Square, and it was full of 1,000 young Asians all dancing to Bhangra music, the kind of music that their parents initially listened to. But then for me, what made it exciting was the fact that people like Bali Sagoo, Johnny Z, these British Asians came along and started remixing what the older generation were doing, which was pure Bhangra and the pure Bhangra dances. And they started remixing stuff, particularly Bali Sagoo. He started mixing reggae tracks because he was really into reggae, and so was I, and started creating this sort of ragga kind of Bhangra sound. And that absolutely blew my mind, which is why I used it for my very first feature, Bhaji on the Beach. So one of the songs is by Bali, and then that started my lifelong relationship with Bali now, and he's a part of most of my films.
Tell us a bit more about the daytimers, because as the clue is in the name, these huge events are happening, as you say, at daytime. And kids are bunking off school to go and to dance and to come back home without their parents clocking what has happened.
In my movie Blinded by the Light, I actually filmed a daytimer because it's set in the 80s.
Yes.
So there is a scene in that movie, and basically what happened was the music was so popular and the culture around it was so popular, but girls were not allowed out at night, particularly not to go clubbing. And so what used to happen was people would start putting on these daytimers at like midday, and so girls would go off to school, and then at lunchtime go off to these clubs, take the change of clothes with them, and then everyone would be dancing away as if they were in a club. And then at 4 o'clock, everyone would tap out, and then you'd go home, and the parents wouldn't be none the wiser. Bands were blowing up all over the country. New dances were being devised that took old traditional Bhangra moves and adapting them into a modern sort of way of dancing, like taking hand gestures but making them feel a bit more modern,
Yeah. Well, was dance and dance classes, were they a part of your life? I mean, my hunch is that you're a bit of a demon on the dance floor, but again, I might be wrong.
Well, when I was young, my mum took me to India to stay with her and my grandparents for quite a few months, actually. One of them was poorly. So I ended up being enrolled into a school in India when I was about 9, I think. And while I was there, my mum said, why don't you learn traditional Indian dance? So I did. So I learned traditional Indian dance. But when I came home, I was so embarrassed about it that I never, ever danced, ever, that traditional style.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is, but you see, that was the problem then. You didn't, everyone wanted you to be white and English. And at school, people said, oh, you've got an identity crisis, if you don't know you're Indian or you're English. So everything Indian was sort of looked down upon. And I thought, God, the idea of me prancing around doing this Indian dance with bells around my ankles, no, thank you. Right. So I refused to do it. And it's only later now when I've got a daughter who loves it, and I put her in for kathak dancing. And she was so good at it, and it reminded me of some of my moves. But what I used to do very much as a kid with my friends was sort of come up with dance moves. Like we used to play girl bands, like the Supremes,
Right.
Cut songs, and then we used to put our hands out like the Supremes did. And I remember very clearly sort of doing disco-y and soul dance imitations, of bands. But I was never a brilliant dancer. I did like to dance, and it was music first, and the dancing came with the music, I think.
Right.
For me.
Yeah. And the other thing that's a highlight of several of your films is a full throttle wedding scene. And I mean, honestly, you could have a side hustle as a wedding planner, I think, because you kind of think about them in such beautiful detail. And in those scenes, everyone is dancing and you're moving around and you're grabbing really quite intimate interactions right in the middle of the throng. How challenging are those huge group scenes to film?
Well, in Bend It Like Beckham, of course, the wedding scene at the end, a lot of people there were my family and friends of friends. And it was like an Indian wedding, and everyone was so happy to be there. And also the band, B21, were fantastic. So it did feel like a wedding. And at our weddings, everyone gets up and dances. So I didn't have any trouble getting people to dance. What was hard was you had to make sure that you followed the narrative. You were on top of the story you were telling and not getting too waylaid. But one of the famous moments is our Indian conga dance, which is Rail Gandhi, which is
Oh,
a sort
yes.
of anthem for us. And it's sort of about, come on, let's go make a train, as we dance. Come and join the train of happiness and love. And, it's called Rail Gandhi. And in that sequence, I couldn't resist not being part of it. So you'll see me all over the movie in that sequence, being part of the conga.
That's brilliant. 'Cause I mean, I know Hitchcock does a little cameo, but you never see him in a conga line. So that is quite impressive.
When it came to Bride and Prejudice, though, I mean, that was a proper full-on Hindi British musical style,
Yeah.
Bollywood, as people say. But what I did there was I wanted different styles of dance. So we had the traditional sort of Punjabi Bhangra style in the first song. And then later on, we had a Gujarati Garba stick dance style. Then we had Ashanti and sort of hippies in Goa dancing away style, like we varied it up.
Yeah.
And then we had some musical theatre type singing and dancing as well. For me, it is about seeing how the movement blends with the music to culturally tell the story in the movie, as it were, as opposed to purist sort of dance. Although I have to
Yes.
say, I'm friends with Akram Khan, and I'm always blown away by what he does and what he does with his body.
Absolutely. Yeah. So are you very aware when you're casting of someone's physical presence? Because I mean, in virtually all your films, people, certainly the leads, are asked to do a lot of different kinds of movement. They're young and restless and they're always on the move.
Oh, yeah, physicality is an important part of acting and filmmaking for sure. Physicality is and how someone moves. I mean, ask any actor how they choose to make their character walk, talk, hold themselves. What is their gait in relation to working with the director? It's a fantastic voyage of discovery. When you first cast an actor and you talk about these things, all this is very, very important. And so most actors, I think, now have some kind of training, physical training in movement of some kind. A lot of people, of course, do yoga now and stretches, so they're quite limber. But I
Yeah.
think it's endlessly fascinating to me to see how physicality and movement ends up defining characters and actors, I should say, in movies that aren't quite a dance necessarily, but to have a presence on screen.
Yeah. And I was also wondering about your physicality as a director. I mean, especially early in your career, did you think about how to project leadership when you were on a film set? What do you sort of do to your body to be that authority figure?
Um, well, that's interesting. I guess I never really thought about that at the beginning because I was, I didn't really know other directors and hadn't really been on sets with other directors. So what you do is you just get on with your job, which is to answer a million questions all the time. And because you know your story inside out, you're prepped, you have answers. And so you win people's trust As things have, progressed, I find that, well, in the early days also, that I think that some people did have an issue with me being a woman and also being Asian. So in the very, very early days, I think there was a couple of times when there was some issues, but largely after that, I think you have to step up and take control. What's interesting though in India, what I do quite a lot, a bit in England, I've done it in England, but in India, they have a system there where the director often has a microphone and a speaker, because especially when you have lots of extras. And so often the director talks, through the mic.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And what I often do is, when after lunch, for example, when everyone's a bit sluggish, I always play music. And or when there's a problem or we're waiting for something and everyone's sort of sitting around, I often play music and get people to get to dance, get in the mood and get lively. And that always goes down well in India because, of course, in India people love to sing and dance. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always loved the closing credits of Bend It Like Beckham as well, because there's a lot of that. And there are little scenes with you and the cast and crew getting everyone to sing along and dance along. And you're often in the middle of those little snippets, kind of bopping enthusiastically.
Yes, yes. On set, I do like to have a lot of camaraderie. People are spending time there together in a very intense way. So the last thing you want is for it to be stressful. My policy is to feed everyone well, praise everyone for the good work that they're doing, and lead a happy ship as much as I can. There are other directors I know who like the tension and like to make people feel a bit on edge because dramatically maybe it gives them what they want. But for me, music sort of comes into that, and dance, and of course our rap parties are legendary.
Bend It Like Beckham also became a West End show, so it did become a fully fledged musical. How was that experience? Was it a very different sort of a world to the film world, or are theatre animals the same as film animals, as it
You
were?
know what? It actually was not that different because it was still storytelling, and for me it was fusion. My choreographer, Alita Collins, we spent a lot of time together talking about fusion, and how to create movement that narratively worked for each particular moment. And it was important for me to get some traditional Indian moves in, but at the same time, because we had girls in soccer gear, we needed to have that sort of sense of power, girl power, as it were, and have strong athletic moves as well. Because, see, when I made Bend It Like Beckham, it was very rare to see women looking really powerful and strident in an athletic way on screen. So with the musical, certainly when we were casting the musical, we needed women who were triple threats. They could dance, they could sing, and they could act. They needed to carry the soccer scenes as movement as well as song.
And brilliant thing about Alita Collins is that movement is never just movement. As you say, it's always storytelling. It's always about character. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a few moments which were sort of big show-stoppy moments, as it were. But, but generally it was amazing how dance can be emotional on the stage. It is on camera as well, I think. But on the stage, when people are dancing their hearts out, it's emotional.
Yeah, it's just thrilling because there is obviously no trickery. You're just got that shared physical presence, haven't you?
Yes, yes.
So, Gurinder, you're part of the Dream Palaces season, which is reopening BFI South Bank, where leading directors introduce a favourite movie, and your choice is Car Wash, which is a fantastic film. And again, just a sidestep from being an actual musical. Why does it speak to you so strongly?
I watched it a couple of years ago and I realised how much of an influence it had had on me because I didn't know at the time when I saw it for the first time I was ever going to be a film director. But when I look at it now, I mean, it's about identity, it's about race, it's about a myriad of characters all coming together in this one space who are all discussing different versions of those themes for themselves. And that is exactly what Bhaji on the Beach was, my first film.
Yes.
I obviously felt quite influenced by the fact that you have all these different voices. And so instead of having just one character, you've got all these different Black experiences, that are feeding into this incredible, entertaining, yet political piece of work. Also, we'd had the Black Lives Matter movement as well. And I just felt that this here was a movie that was really important to me, actually, when I was growing up. And I felt that if I'm going to put a movie up there and that other people are going to come because of me, then let it be this. And also, I defy anyone to not move to the title song.
Yeah. And because the radio is playing in the car wash all day, you've just got this endless stream of brilliant funk and disco from beginning to end. It is so joyous, isn't it? And the way it weaves into people's lives, really deftly.
Oh, yeah. Such an underrated movie.
Yeah, and that's Michael Schultz, isn't it?
Right.
He's not someone who's sort of often in the conversation. It's sad that he's not had his due.
Yes.
And I do love the term Dream Palace. And I know it's a 1930s term for cinema, but it's also perfect for anywhere where art is created and shared. Live audiences, obviously they're important for dancers and for stage performers, but why do they matter to a film director?
Well, I just think it's an important cultural experience. I think going out to the theatre, sitting in a room with lots of people where you're all laughing at the same thing or crying even at the same thing. I mean, it's an incredible, humane experience, I think. Also, if people are watching a film that's not very good, and everyone's laughing and moaning, like that collective experience, I find to be incredibly moving at times, but also just entertaining. I like to hear what other people think and say, and I like to judge what the crowd's feeling, particularly as a filmmaker, because then where you're going with your work and what's working, what isn't working. But that idea of going to the cinema and seeing work on huge screens like that, it's an art form. And as much as I love my 75-inch TV, watching movies and TV and all the rest of it, that's a lonely experience. That's you in your house, maybe with, in my case, my husband who's snoring on the sofa, fallen asleep. Kids are busy now doing their own things, on their iPads and laptops and PS4s, whatever. It's a lonely experience, but I think that idea of going to the theatre and just not being disturbed or distracted and being amongst other people who have come there to enjoy or be educated or be informed or just enjoy the art, it's a cultural experience, particularly if the film was a foreign language film of a different country, and then the cinema would be packed with people from that country, sitting there with them, enjoying their culture, their film, and then you're also part of that.
Gurinder, I am going to let you go, but before I do that, I have to ask the question in the podcast title. Why does dance matter to you?
Dance matters to me because it is about joy. It's joyful. We dance, in my culture particularly, when we're feeling joyous, at weddings, at parties, after people have had a few drinks, to get up and dance in the front room. for me, it's a way that we celebrate our lives and celebrate ourselves in convivial social situations. That's why dance matters. But also, on another level, dance is an incredible expression of our experience as human beings, and what people can achieve with dance movement, is beguiling. And, contemporary dance, we don't often get treated to that in a mainstream way. It's seen as sort of more art house. But I think if you look at every single culture in the world, every culture has its own dance, its own folk dances or its own national dances. And so it's a uniquely human thing to do, to dance.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gurinder. Thank you for your time.
Thank
you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Art that touches the heart, it's a big thing, and to feel that in the presence of other people is amazing. Gurinder has made me long to settle once again in a darkened theatre or cinema, eyes wide open, ready for whatever is coming. I'd love to hear what dance has made you laugh and cry. Let me know at Mr. David Jays on Twitter. The RAD is at RAD headquarters. Our show notes include links to the BFI's Dream Palaces season and to the RAD's work. And please do subscribe and like the podcast. It helps us find other people who might enjoy Why Dance Matters. Our guest today was Gurinder Chadha. Why Dance Matters is made by the RAD team of Hayley Izzard, Celia Moran and Melanie Murphy. Our artwork is by Bex Glendinning, and our totally honoured wedding planner is our producer, Sarah Miles. I'm David Jays. Take care and see you soon.